out on me. Friends, never more my life they'll see. Friends, never they were anyway. My friend, the stars may talk easy. Those stars lasted longer than a friendship did for me. My feelings for her never could quite explain. I had the span of a short morning rain. I can't live with this world. This world no live with me. I can't live by its rules. You can't adapt to me. No known escape. Can't accept the way that I feel. I can't live with this world except for my Debbie. She'll take all of them over one of me. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I'll be tonight's host. With us we have Richard Madweed, who's a psychologist, and we're going to talk about alienation and the feeling that teenagers have, in particular, adolescents specifically. Richard, tell us a little background on this subject.
Well, if you think back when you were a teenager, can you remember that?
Yeah, about a week ago.
Remember that about a week ago? You know, it's a stage of a lot of things, one of which is identity. You know, who are we, right? Mm-hmm. And we're always searching for who we are. It's also a time within that theme that you're learning to socialize. You know, you're getting socialized more and more and more. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, the lyrics of some of that song, I noticed in there was lyrics about, you know, friendships and losing friendships and things. And
it actually goes back to when I was an adolescent.
Yeah.
And when I found that as an adolescent, you have all these feelings of everybody's different and nobody understands me. And I don't think teenagers, at least I didn't, and I don't think any of my contemporaries did, understand the fact that everybody else is going through exactly the same thing that we are.
Exactly.
We think we're the only ones that are going through these horrible trials and tribulations.
Right. Everyone's going through the same thing.
Everyone's
walking around thinking that.
At least that's what I told my kids, and I hope I was correct in telling them that.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think all of those teenagers are walking around thinking that they're the only ones that are going through those experiences, and they try to act like nothing's wrong, right? And they try to push it away, but everyone at that age is experiencing exactly the same thing. You know, they're all trying to make friendships and make bonds and figure out who they want to become. You know, who they want to be. You know, within their friends. It's a very difficult period. I mean, you know, for some young people, it can be, you know, be a time where there's some depression. And feeling like you're alone, like you are the only person that's experiencing this teenage stuff.
So when we tell our teenagers and we tell our young people, enjoy these years, these are the best years of your lives.
Did someone tell you that when you were a teenager?
Sure, and I think everybody.
How did you feel about that?
I thought that they were lying for their teeth,
Exactly.
and God forbid, God forbid these were the best years of my life because it was really very, very difficult to go through personally.
Yeah.
So I kind of told my kids, and again, I think, you know, I learned this from what I went through. I told them basically that enjoy your teenage years, but they're the roughest years of your life. If you can survive, things actually get better as you get older.
Yeah.
And I think that I've done that to be the case. And I think my kids who are now 22, 28, and 31 pretty much found that to be the case also. They're living very comfortable, very reasonable, pretty well-adjusted adult lives. But they all had their troubles when they were teenagers, as I really think all of us do, and all of us did.
A lot of teenagers struggle with all of that.
Yeah.
And as we grow, developmentally, if you think of how children grow up emotionally, there's direct characteristics in each stage of development. And one of the things that children are trying to learn just before they get into pre-adolescence is how to navigate the world. How do we get through the world? And there's this concept of the locus of control that you study in psychology. You might have studied it when you took Psychology 101 in college, but that speaks to the idea of when you're young, when you're like adolescents, pre-adolescents, you really look at the world as a place that things happen and you don't have a lot of control on them. You don't have much control about what happens in your life.
And maybe the control that you have, you're afraid of, because
you can be afraid of it.
It's a new thing. It's a new toy, so to speak, and it's a very dangerous new toy.
Yeah, exactly. So you go through those years, kind of thinking, well, people just have good luck and bad luck, and I guess sometimes I have bad luck, and some teenagers, if they have a series of losses or things that happen, then they start to believe that they just have bad luck. Sometimes, those teenagers. And so that can be a downward spiral. That can be a really big challenge. And then as we raise them a little bit more, hopefully the parents behind the scenes in schools and all of us in the community that are raising kids are trying to teach our kids that, we do have control over things in our life, and that if we work hard and we think through things, we get some advice sometime, we talk to our parents, we talk to our friends, we can figure things out, we can make things happen in our life. So things aren't always controlled by the external world, So hopefully what we want to have on the other side of this as they grow through adolescence is a person that grows into young adulthood that can see that the world isn't just controlling them, that they have opportunities to make things happen. We can't control everything. We can't control a car coming down the road and coming into our lane and hitting us by accident. We can't control things like that, but we can control things that we're working on in life. We can control how we're doing in school. We can control, what we're working towards, things that we want out of life. We can plan for that. We can make decisions. We can make good decisions about how we take care of ourselves, things like that.
It sounds like adolescents kind of are in, as you might imagine, a learning curve where they start off with a little bit. As obviously small children want their parents to be completely in control of them, and growing up in the as a yuppie parent and having yuppie contemporaries with children, a lot of my contemporaries tried to be friends to their kids.
Yeah.
And I saw that rebellion in a lot of other people's children, and tried to steer away from that, trying to be friends with my kids. Because it seems like kids growing up, the last thing in the world is they want more friends. They've got enough friends. They want to have that external control of the parents dictating what they want them to do.
Sure.
And then little by little, very gradually, and you can speak to what age this generally happens at, but you maybe kind of begin to take a little bit more internal control of the world around you.
Yeah, well, parents, I'm a parent, you're a parent. I mean, we are the ones that are trying to provide structure for our kids, and they have plenty of friends, so what you were talking about a minute ago was that could be a problem in some families when a parent is trying to parent through some kind of a friendship role. That can be very confusing for kids. I've had several cases in my office over the years in which that's been the dynamic, and it's all out of love, of course, but it can present some problems as they get into their middle or late adolescence, because when kids want to do more on their own and they want more freedom, and the parents trying to put structure on them, then they say, "Wait a minute now. Why are you giving me these rules? I thought this was cool. I thought I could come in later."
Yeah, so parents are kind of doing things in reverse.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
They give them.
Yeah.
Now, Johnny, do you think it's time to go to bed?
Right.
Johnny, do you think you'd like to have dinner? Would you like to eat those peas?
That could be some examples.
Johnny doesn't want it. Johnny doesn't want to know what the parent wants to let them do.
Yeah.
Parents are kind of there to,
Yeah.
you know, at least verbally give them that structure and that guidance that they, in fact, really crave.
So, you know, if you're doing that friendship parenting style in the early years, then when they get into teenage years, that can blow up in your face, because then, you know, they're driving, they want to stay out later, and then if the parent says, well, you know, let's look at this, let's be safe about this, and let's make some guidelines, and there can be some problems, because the child then is saying, well, wait a minute, we didn't have these kinds of conversations before. Why are we having them now? You know, so you can get a rebellious kid at that point.
Yeah, and the kids say to themselves, well, what happened to my friendly?
Yeah, what happened to this?
What happened to the friendly parent?
This nice relationship we had, where you didn't give me any rules, you know.
Yeah.
So that can be problematic. But it's really a tough time. I mean, I had a tough time in my adolescence. It was just, you know, trying to figure out, right, like if you're in high school and you're trying to figure out, all right, what's the college thing going to be? Are you going to go to college? Of course, everyone is expected to go to college in America, even though we need lots of other people to do things, but we're all expected to go to college and become someone, you know. And so how do you figure that out when you're in high school? You know, you're in 10th grade, or you're in 9th grade, and people are already talking to you about, well, where are you going to go to college? What are you going to study? Who are you going to be? Who knows?
This seems like the
gonna...
script of a movie called The Graduate.
Yeah, right. Who knows who
where
you're
Dustin
going to be?
Hoffman comes back from college, and all his life, his parents have told him what he's going to do, and they continue doing that as he becomes a young man. And he comes back, and he doesn't know how to fend for himself.
Right, exactly. It's a great movie that I'm showing one of my classes down at Fairfield University called Into the Wild. I don't know whether you've ever seen that.
No.
It's a story about a young man that is, you know, pretty much pressured into going to college by his family in the late 60s and in the beginning of the 70s. And he goes because his father and mother are really leaning on him. So he does it all, and he gets good grades, and they're hovering over him the whole time. But when he graduates, 2 days after he graduates, he just leaves. You know, and he takes a trip to Alaska on foot. Hikes to Alaska.
Oh my God, that must be fascinating.
So it's a great movie, but it's a great story that has something to do with what we're talking about tonight, you know, about the topic of him trying to figure out, well, who am I? You know, I did all the things that my parents told me to do. I was a good kid. I didn't get in any trouble. I did everything they told me to do, but now I don't know who I am. So now I have to figure out who I am, even though I did the things that my parents told me to do.
So that self-discovery stage comes much later than maybe it ought to naturally.
Yeah, because, you know, he really grew up, in this movie anyway, he grew up in a very rigid, structured family with no flexibility, you know, pretty much a perfectionistic family system. And he did everything that they asked him to do. So a couple of days after graduation, he sells his car that they had bought him, little used car. It takes all his money out of his bank, you know, bank account, and, you know, takes off to Alaska and says goodbye, you know, and it doesn't even tell them where he's going. And actually, it's a true story. It's based on a book. And if you have a chance to watch it, you can probably get it on Netflix or rent it, you know.
I could imagine probably that half the audience watching that film are going to be cringing.
Yeah.
Because, oh my God, this is kind of what we've done to our children. We've gotten them to this point, and half the audience is probably going to be cheering like crazy.
Sure.
Because, oh my God, this is great. He's striking out on his own.
Yeah.
What a marvelous feel-good film.
Sure. For some families, it's going to be that, you know. Now, when you were in high school, did you know what you wanted to do with your life?
No.
Had no idea.
I grew up thinking about being an archaeologist.
Yeah.
Loved dinosaurs. Went to college thinking about a degree in mathematics.
You get at math. Obviously, you must have been good at math.
Yeah, math, not only in the numbers crunching sense, but in the more global, the calculus and analytic geometry, the more I don't want to say derivatives because that's become a naughty word with the stock market, but differential calculus, which is sort of what derivatives are built on.
Yeah.
But and ended up being a teacher.
Okay.
Finished up at WestConn.
And when did you figure that out, that you wanted to be a teacher?
In steps, and I'm not really exactly sure what clicked.
Right.
But it all kind of happened. Now, to go back a generation, my dad grew up in a family that was very rigid, and my grandparents were first-generation Americans, Irish, and they told my dad and his brother what they were going to do with their lives. My dad was, George, my uncle, was going to be the businessman. He ended up going to work for Hallmark and worked his entire career for Hallmark cards, and never to me really seemed super happy about what he was doing. Like maybe he would have liked to have had a little say in what he did. And likewise, my dad was told that Sam, you're not going to amount to anything, so you're going to be a farmer or something of that nature. And my dad was pretty bright in a lot of areas. Never had the opportunity to go to college. Never had the opportunity to do the kinds of things that would have helped him find out what he wanted to do with his life. Now, I'll give my parents credit, both of them, because both of them were abused, spanked. Mercilessly. And together, somehow, they figured out that that was the wrong thing to do, and it didn't travel into the next generation. My parents never spanked me, and I give them a huge amount of credit for that, because they broke that cycle of violence. And because of that, I had the opportunity to pretty much do, I would say, in a sense, I kind of raised myself. They were hands-on, but not heavily hands-on.
They just decided to kind of reverse that whole style, huh?
They kind of they weren't physically tough with me. Right. My dad almost did swing at me once when I talked back to my mom, and he heard about it later, but he didn't. He stopped himself. But I learned, you try to think that every generation is going to try to do things a little bit better for their kids in an important way than their parents did for them. And the same way that my parents broke that cycle of violence and were better parents to me than both of their parents were to them. Yeah. I tried to do a little bit better, and I don't know if I was successful or not, time will tell. But I tried to be, well, my parents weren't there for me a lot of the time, and I tried to be a little bit more hands-on, but strike a balance between being hands-on and being too hands-on. I don't know. You'll have to ask my kids. That's a whole other story and a whole other show.
Right?
That's a whole other show.
Exactly. Yeah.
But
so you found yourself through steps, as you said, and that's usually what teenagers start to do. I mean, they can be influenced by their parents in terms of, what to kind of look at in life, and but then they kind of go through steps of exploring. So it's a time where we're all exploring different things that we're interested in. Just because we're interested in being a brain surgeon doesn't mean we have the ability to be a brain surgeon.
Sure,
but you may want to explore that.
No harm in trying.
Yeah. So it's and it can last. What we've been seeing the last 20 years or so in my profession is that adolescence, and this is a good part of our conversation coming up now. Is that we're seeing that the maturity level and the emotional growth in adolescence is really extending itself into the late 20s, middle to late 20s. In other words, we're finding that there's a good percentage of young people that do all the right things. They go to college, they make good decisions, they make good choices, but they aren't growing, as fast as they were in previous generations in terms of their maturity level and their own developmental characteristics.
I have to thank you very much for saying that, because I told my kids growing up, look, you're probably going to live to be 100. Every generation has a little bit more longevity of life over the previous generation. Right. So I said to them, you're probably going to live to be 100. So if you take a little longer in each segment of your life, if you take till you're 30 to decide what you want to do, who you want to be, that's okay. Yeah. Now, thankfully, my two girls didn't do that. They didn't take that long. But my son took a little longer. So I tried to give them that opportunity to live their life in larger segments. If you think of childhood as being a segment, adolescence, and then adulthood, and then the geriatric years, again, unfortunately, sometimes a little longer than it used to be. Yeah. But
I think there's been generations of parents that have actually produced this dynamic, and it's good, because it doesn't force young people to make decisions, early in life that they may spend time with that don't work, and there's those years of the 20s, I mean, how many people really, it's a very small percentage of people actually get through college and then walk into something as a career and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do for the next 35 years. I mean,
so that'd be, say, 22, 23 years old.
Yeah.
College graduate, let's say if they go to grad school, then they're 23, 24, 25 years old.
So you're into your middle 20s, late 20s, and people...
And you're set for life. That seems like an awful long time.
Right.
From
so
25.
we're really not seeing that much anymore. It's a very small percentage now of those young people that are falling into that category, unlike some years ago where you would graduate from college, you'd go into teaching, you'd be a teacher for 50 years, and you'd retire. But that's all changed. You know, kids are going to college. They don't know what they're going to do when they get out, a certain percentage of them, and they spend their 20s kind of exploring different occupations and different things related to their studies. And finally we see that by maybe their late 20s they're falling into something that makes some sense, you know, and then they get into the whole 30s thing where work becomes serious, you know, and they start to have families and things like that. So it's a whole big different picture than it was even in my generation, you know, when I grew up. I mean,
definitely different, yeah. Now, while I'm thinking about it, I'm going to give a little shout out to Dr. Spock. Because Dr. Spock, of course, the famous author, Baby and Child Care.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that I learned, you know, in school we did not learn how to be parents, and probably a little bit more so now than we used to. I've seen in the high schools and in the junior high schools even that boys and girls are being taught how to be parents, and that's a very good thing, I think. But everything I knew and tried, I kind of learned from Dr. Spock, Baby and Child Care, and the other books that he wrote, and I give him absolute wonderful, wonderful credit.
Sure, he made a major
He helped our whole generation, I think.
Right, major contribution
Absolutely,
to parenting. Yeah.
What other authors should our audience think about reading up on to give them a little of that insight?
Well, you know, I really enjoy Dr. Phil. Okay, now some people may not like his show.
It's a little hokey,
but he's got some good books out, and his shows often will focus on family issues with teenagers. I think he's got a very, you know, direct approach. I think as an audience you can learn a lot from watching his shows when he has cases on about families and teenagers. He believes in a lot of communication, as well as most of our field does. But
so his approach is a good practical one, then.
Absolutely, big, you know, good practical approach. And he's got. He often has kids on that will tell their stories about their challenges, so it kind of lets America see that, you know, this is a normal thing. This is not abnormal. And also he does highlight some of the tragedies of, you know, teenagers. I mean, it's a huge problem with alcohol and other substances still with us. That's not getting any better.
I don't really know much about Dr. Phil because he kind of came onto the scene when I was kind of almost out of that that parenting stage and didn't, you know, but I've watched enough of it to get a grasp, to get a sense that he seems to be pretty level-headed in his approach.
I think so, yeah. He's a solution-focused therapist, meaning that he tries to believe that people have solutions with their kids, and they need to maybe meet with a professional sometimes to help flush out some of the solutions and have a plan to work with your kids to reach some goals that that are important to you. You know.
So what your goal is, what your process is really is to be kind of an assistant.
I'm kind of a
to adolescents working through the process and making their own decisions.
Yeah, I look at myself as a facilitator, I guess.
Facilitator.